In today's video, I'm going to show you how I took this old bed frame and turned it into this faux fireplace for my dining room makeover. Let's get started.
So here's a picture of the bed frame as it appeared on Facebook Marketplace. But for this project, we're only going to be using the footboard and the posts. I started by removing these gold decorative pieces. I'm going to be keeping these so that I can put them back on when the project is done. Next, I sawed off the dowels that were at each end of the footboard. I used those to plug the holes that were in the posts where the footboard was attached. Then I used wood filler to cover the holes. This will all get sanded later. Next, I needed to remove this cross piece. One side was already loose and I could just pull it out. The other side I sawed off as closely as I could to the post. For the side that pulled right out, I measured the depth of the hole and used the miter saw to cut that much off of the cross rail to fill the hole. Using wood glue and a hammer, I plugged the hole and then covered it with wood filler. And then I sanded it down flush. I did this for both posts. Next, it was time to measure for the height of the posts. I wanted the finished fireplace to sit just under the light switch, so I needed to take into consideration the thickness of the mantle when taking my final measurement. This is where I realized there was a problem. Okay, so our house was built in 1903, so it's old. So like a lot of old houses, there's some things that aren't level, as is the case with the floor where I wanted to put the fireplace. I found out that it drops off about 3/4 of an inch. In order to fix this, I had to glue a piece back onto the post that was going to be on the right side of the fireplace. Next, using a sander and some sandpaper, I sanded down the bottom portion of the post. Then I needed to remove the back portion of the trim piece so that it would sit flush up against the wood. Next, I took measurements and cut out the pieces of wood that I would be using for the frame. Here you see it laid out on the floor so I could get an idea of what I wanted it to look like. I was going for a layered look, but you'll see later on in the video that this did change slightly. So for these two back pieces, I needed to take a total measurement from the top of the baseboard to the bottom of the light switch and subtract the width of the mantle and the width of the cross piece, and that would give me the length for my two back pieces. But in my case, I needed to add 3/4 of an inch to the right side in order to keep it level. For the next two pieces, I cut those the same length as the posts. I then cut my cross piece to the same width. I attached everything together with wood glue and 1 1/4 inch screws. Next, I gave each post a light sanding. and wiped it down with tack cloth to make sure I got all the sanding dust off. After that, I primed it. I applied it using a foam brush, but only because I didn't have any spray primer at the time. I really wish I would have waited until I got some because it would have been a lot easier and there wouldn't have been any brush strokes in the primer. But when you look at the finished product, you really can't see them anyway. And here's what it looked like after it was primed. I did this for both posts. I also caulked the gaps in the trim at the bottom. And here's what it looked like after. Next, I glued the post to the frame. I set weights on top to help hold it down. Then, for extra support, after the glue was dry, I screwed the post to the frame from the back using 1.5-inch screws. Now here's where I started to get excited. It's beginning to look like a fireplace. But this is also the point in the video where I had mentioned earlier that the design would change slightly. My husband suggested cutting off the overhang on each side so that it would look like a solid piece of wood. After cutting off the overhang with the circular saw, he also added some plywood and some decorative trim around the center of the fireplace. And now it was ready to be painted. To do this, I used the Wagner sprayer to apply 2 coats. And this is what it looked like after. Remember those gold decorative pieces? I put those back on as well. Now it was time to attach the mantle. To do this, my husband showed me how to use the Craig pocket hole jig to drill holes across the top of the back. This is where I would be drilling the screws into the bottom of the mantle to hold it on. Next, I took these leftover strips of plastic ceiling tile, spray painted them gold, and attached them to the front using Loctite. For the last step, I took some more decorative molding, spray painted it white, and used it to trim out the gold tiles. And that's how I turn an old bed frame into a faux fireplace. Thanks for watching. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe.